And with that, I think a whole new era started when this concept really took hold of the population. So behavioral science really has gone mainstream in the last few years. And to really appreciate it, we should start with, I guess, what the early days of behavioral economics were. And a guy who I think often gets overlooked is Herbert Simon. I mean, he doesn't. He's actually a Nobel laureate. He gets a lot of credit for awesome things, that's for sure. But he actually came up with bounded rationality. A great concept, which basically says a lot of the things we've just talked about. In particular, he talked about the fact that given information is sometimes very difficult to obtain all of the information necessary. It's also difficult if we have all of the information to always go through this cognitive effort. Sometimes our brains just can't make the best decision even if all information is available. To do our best, we have this bounded rationality. And this was really crucial in the development of what later very popularly became known as behavioral economics. And these two guys, Taubman and Tversky, wrote several papers really documenting these deviations that we just talked about, these heuristics, these biases. And actually, Taubman is also a Nobel laureate, and obviously Tversky would be too if he had lived long enough to get it, but unfortunately not. So these are really important people who we have to thank for a lot to understand decision-making in this new concept. I would definitely recommend, if you ever want to read a bit of the research behind this, this is a famous paper in Econometrica about loss aversion, prospect theory, and this is like a science paper summarizing most of the heuristics that we mentioned before. Yet again, it was the 70s, everyone was excited about this, the whole field of research was really born from this. But it didn't quite make it into the public sphere yet, although it became more and more famous, and a Nobel Prize was awarded in 2002 to Kahneman. I would say this book has trumped everything in the public eye about how important these biases are in our decision making. And importantly, Nudge, written by Richard Thaler and Carl Sunstein, who is actually here at the Harvard Law School, they really made a case for why governments and organizations should start thinking about these biases and not ignore them. Don't just say obesity is a problem that we're trying to really solve, but we're not going to actually take into account that people have trouble stopping eating. Yes, we need to do something about Cass Sunstein's example with the cafeteria. When our kids go to school, where are the chips versus the apples and the oranges? So these kind of things really are highlighted in this book. They are obviously not the only ones. There are tons of books that have come out recently. Obviously, you can see that I definitely did not take these pictures, by the way. But if you ever type in a book title, for whatever it is, I assume, you will always have artistic sitting on the table. A nice background is some nice wood. This is Dan Ariely's book, obviously on a nice table. This is Danny Kahneman's book on a nice table. So with all of these tables in the background, you shouldn't forget that the books are important too when you Google it. And this one is basically a summary of Danny Kahneman's life and his achievements after the Nobel laureate and after the Nobel Prize. After enough books on tables have been photographed, this law became very important. And any Brits in here by any chance? No, shame. I was going to test if who recognizes the number 10. Downing Street, that's right, exactly. And it's important because that's where really, in 2010, a whole new idea of government came into being, basically. These four guys here are some of the early members of the Behavioral Insights team. They are still all there, and they are now leading different sections of what used to be a team of 4 or 5 people, 6, 7 later on. And then now it's somewhere in the 80 to 100 people, so really grew fast. Importantly, they really started in government, in the center of government in the UK, and in the Prime Minister's office, or like his home, number 10, that's also where he started with the experiments, or at least trying to connect to people who he could do experiments with. And I should say, in hindsight, it looks like this was always going to happen, but at the time, it wasn't particularly easy to get off the ground. And in particular, because a lot of people were like, it's crazy, we're going to manipulate people, the nanny state, we don't want anything to do with this. And so, not too many agencies were keen on working with that new group in number 10. And so they did what I think was something quite brilliant. What's the kind of department in government that is not the most liked, usually by people, but also within government?
Taxes.
Yes. So they talked to the tax people who were glad that someone was interested in trying to help them. It turns out most people don't want to pay their taxes. Or if they do, they don't pay it on time. And it makes the tax authorities not happy because a lot of costs involved with getting these people to pay. And people have to pay penalties. So it's really not in their best interest either, because eventually they'll have to do it. I would say the behavioral insights team has done a lot of cool things. This is one of the most famous trials they have done, and it's super simple. It takes advantage of a simple line in a letter. And that's a social norm, and it says 9 out of 10 people pay their tax on time. And you would think, obviously, this isn't like the biggest insight ever, but it really can be, and I'll show you in a second why that is. And second, one of the things that people also overlook is the fact that not many people pay attention to what a tax letter looks like at the time it's being sent out. How many people of you have thought, we need the best guys to think about what this legal document is going to look like when we send it out to everyone? Very often, you hand it off to an intern who writes it up because it needs to go out tomorrow, and then legal needs to see it, and they add 5 more paragraphs about all the things you're not allowed to do. And eventually, it's like this kind of letter that no one wants to receive because no one understands what's going on. So these guys really sat down and thought about this very carefully. Yes, please.
Is it true that 9 out of 10 people pay their tax on time?
Good question. Yes, it is. And that's actually a really good question to ask yourself always when you are in organizations and in government. Do you want to lie to people? If you're the government, I would recommend you don't. It usually pays off if people know that they can trust and rely on you telling the truth. But they actually did some variations. They always wanted to make sure that they said what was actually true. And in particular, I'll show you this one. When they went down to a more local area, they could be more precise, right? They could say 95% of people pay their taxes on time. When it was true, that's the kind of information you want to include, right? And so the local norm actually is exactly an example of that. When they said 9 out of 10 people, so let's say it's 9 out of 10 people, in your town pay their taxes on time. It increased payments within 23 days, or after 23 days of receiving this letter, by 2 percentage points. And keep in mind, the 23 days is just an arbitrary deadline, legal, but it saves people money and the government, so that they're not filing late. The same is true if you tell people with a debt like yours, they will pay on time. And if you combine it, it has an additional effect. So, do you have a question?
I'm wondering for countries
yes.
that do not have 9 out of 10, and it's like, let's say it's over 50%.
Right.
But let's say it's 6 out of 10.
What do you think? What would happen?
I mean, it wouldn't be a good sentence, but like, how could you? Would there be a shame, or like, do you have? Could you do that because
so,
you don't want to?
First question is, do you think it would work?
Oh, I don't think, because you're actually making people feel that they belong to the norm. So it's the wrong thing to do.
Right. So basically, 2 out of 10 people are paying their taxes on time. Wow, what suckers. Everyone else is getting away for free, right? Yes, very good concern, and in fact, it's not the kind of thing you want to try lightly. So this is why, and I'm glad you asked this, because this is why we can sometimes really use these lab experiments that often seem not like the real thing, but we can use social norms, and in the lab, artificially vary whether it's 2 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10. And we understand how social norms work, right? The mechanism behind social norms. And so to your point, yes, it would be dangerous to put this into place in letters like this, because it's unlikely to work. In fact, it could backfire. The guy who's most famous for social norms is Cialdini, and he has some very cool experiments where he basically shows it depends on what people perceive the norm to be in an area. So if you put up signs that say please don't litter, and it's super clean around it, no one's going to drop their Coke bottle and walk off. They'll try to pick it up. But if you have that same sign and the whole street is littered, people are like, yeah, right. I'm not going to be one person cleaning up after everyone. So I think one of those things we should take away from this is we should trial what we can, but we need to use common sense and research that other people have done already to inform the interventions you're making. Not that you sent the wrong thing out. Cool. So after this success, and I would say it was a big success, it was a big success because this one line is almost nothing. It takes someone to think about this for a bit, an afternoon, and maybe a bit more if you want to be very careful about your wording, to figure out what you should say using the literature on behavioral science, and you can save a lot of money. These are percentage points on millions of people. That's a lot of money saved, with a very simple line. So they became very, very popular very quickly, and a lot more people wanted to work with them. And so let me just, okay, so you have a question?
So something that you talked about when you were talking about the signs, and so it was really the context which was important, like it was treated as literature. Okay, so.
Yeah, that's an example. Actually, it's not just that it needs to be in the physical environment. We have a study actually where we look at, so OPAW I mentioned before, they use social norms and they show you basically how much energy have you saved and how much have your neighbors saved. And when you're the person that's kind of behind your neighbors, you kind of feel bad about it and you start saving energy because you want to feel good about yourself and you don't want to be that one neighbor who doesn't do it, right? Now, we look at actually variation across states, and what we hypothesize is that in some states, your neighbors really care, right? Like California probably is a pretty likely case where people care about us saving energy, and it's a pretty democratic state and things like that. So there's a good reason to believe that the neighbors you're going to sit down over lunch with or at dinner might care about this issue too. So when it comes up, you don't want to be that one neighbor who says, yeah, no, I'm definitely not saving energy. I'm like this really bad guy who has the pool running and the lights on all night. So in those states, we would expect higher savings rates. And in states where maybe this isn't the case, in some cases where you really know that your neighbors think this is ridiculous because climate change is certainly not happening, we shouldn't see this working. And so we find exactly that correlation. So in states where people don't care, the saving rate, it's still there, it's much smaller. We're talking 0.8 percentage points increase. But in states where they care, where on average people think that their neighbors believe, so it's not even, do you believe it? It's the question is, do you think your neighbors think that this is a good thing to do? Then yes, then it seems to go up much more.
So would you be using a different nudge or a different device?
Yeah, so we're trying to work with OPAW to figure that out. Like, what's the right thing to do next, right? Like, how can we get those people who think that neighbors don't care to maybe realize either they do, or we can get around that problem? Yeah.
Is a nudge always, a third-person sort of statement, meaning, like, when you put on a shampoo bottle, rinse, lather, and then add the word repeat? Is that a nudge? Because you're kind of giving a command when you say that, but obviously it's a command that had a big impact on people, right?
Interesting. I haven't thought about it. How often do you repeat? Like, do you keep going? You're like, oh no, I gotta put it on again? Like, do you keep...
I mean, like when they add that word, apparently, I don't know, whatever the amount that, millions of dollars that they've earned by all these people.
That's fascinating. So I didn't know that. That's, I didn't know.
Everybody know this example? No?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Okay.
No, I mean, I totally believe it. So that would be a good example of a nudge. It's really just saying that you should do this again, then people follow it, although there's no reason to do it otherwise. It's a good example. I actually haven't heard of it. I'm going to look this up. This is cool. So I'm going to quickly tell you, I think, let's see how we're on time. So we have about 15 minutes left. So what I would like to do is, one of the things that we're going to talk about more is the methodology itself. I just want to mention like how BIT, like the Behavioral Insights team, I guess they too, but BIT in particular was successful because a lot of these reasons, but in particular I think they figured very early out that you need to have a good methodology. And this is what this course is really about, teaching you the methodology. This is a group of 5 people who came into government or were appointed in number 10, who were not particularly liked, and within a few months turned it around, saved millions for the government, and now are spun out as their own startup. And all they did is actually use science, evidence-based science, and then, like you asked before, went into the actual environment and tested it robustly. So they could go back to politicians and say, now check this out, we actually made it better. And in fact, what I like a lot about this is it changes norms too. So now in Parliament in the UK, there are politicians turning around to their own like groups that they are working with and other departments, and they say, show me your RCT, show me your trial, show me that this actually works. We're going to talk a bit more about the actual randomization. So just to give you a quick, most people know this, I'm going to make it pretty fast, but we're going to talk about this in more detail later anyway. If you have 2 different letters, say this letter has a link to the web page, to the taxes for a change, and another letter that has also a link, but it takes you directly to the form. If you want to randomize that, the idea is simple. You have a bunch of people who you want to send that letter to anyway. That's your normal group of people that are targeted with this letter. And you simply randomly assign them to one bucket or the other. Either the control group, they will receive a letter that has the link to the website. Or the treatment group, they'll have the same letter, the link goes directly to the form that they then have to submit. And keep in mind, the website has the same form, you just have to find it. It's easy, right? Like it's just the tax authority's website, most popular place. So imagine you're in this group, so web page, it's about a 20% return rate in this particular case, but if you were to send them a link directly to the form, turns out that's another 4% increase. And again, very easy to do, you just have to think about the behavioral friction. And you have to randomize to know that this is actually a causative effect. So we're gonna have 2 more things I want to do. So in this case, I want to make this fairly short, but I would like you guys to turn to each other, your neighbor, and talk about the following question, which is one that will come up all the time when you talk to people who have not taken this course and another course at Harvard about randomizing. Is randomization ethical? I'd like you guys to take like a couple of minutes to chat about that, and then we're going to come together in a big group, and I would like to get people a bit going about like what they actually think. Is this the right thing to do? Are we doing something ethically that's good, or something that's bad for us?
What sort of context?
In general, that's right actually, not clinical trials, let's leave that out for a second. Social interventions, the kind of thing that I've just been showing, like tax letters, or energy savings, things like that. So not clinical trials, not natural sciences, we're going to focus on these kind of social interventions. Is that good? All right, let's do it. And with that, I think a whole new era started when this concept really took hold of the population. So behavioral science really has gone mainstream in the last few years. And to really appreciate it, we should start with, I guess, what they are. So these are really important people who we have to thank for a lot to understand decision-making in this new concept. I would definitely recommend, if you ever want to read a bit of the research behind this, this is a famous paper in Econometrica about loss aversion, prospect theory, and this is like a science paper summarizing most of the heuristics that we mentioned before. Very popularly became known as behavioral economics, and these 2 guys, Taubman and Tversky, wrote several papers really documenting these deviations that we just talked about, these heuristics, these biases. And actually, Taubman is also a Nobel laureate, and obviously Tversky would be too if he had lived long enough to get it, but unfortunately in the early days of behavioral economics were. And a guy who I think often gets overlooked is Herbert Simon. I mean, he doesn't, he's actually a Nobel laureate, he gets a lot of credit for awesome things, that's for sure. But he actually came up with bounded rationality. Great concept, which basically says a lot of the things we've just talked about. In particular, he talked about the fact that given information is sometimes very difficult to obtain all of the information necessary. It's also difficult if we have all of the information to always go through this cognitive effort. Sometimes our brains just can't make the best decision even when all information is available. We do our best, we have this bounded rationality. And this was really crucial in the development of what later